Hello viewers, I'm SB, and I want to talk to you for a little bit about running a role-playing game. This was prompted by a discussion and request made on the subreddit, to which there is a link down there in the thing. And honestly, I really don't need much of an excuse to talk about RPGs for 10 minutes or, I don't know, 6-7 hours. I guess we'll see how this goes. Specifically, community member and real internet human Mutewolf asked for my take on DMing D&D, but actually this is going to all be game agnostic advice. So, first things first, sort of the frame into which the rest of this advice fits, is that as a DM or GM or narrator or storyteller or whatever it is that your system calls it, you're primarily responsible for everybody at the table having a good time. Everything else about the job is subordinate to that. It's tempting, especially if you're coming at role-playing games from video games, to have a pretty rigid idea of what rules and systems should be like, right? Because in a video game, the rules are completely rigid and enforced 100% of the time. And to view your role as a sort of the referee of the game as too important. Getting the game right, in the sense that all of the rules are executed exactly as they appear in the book and with maximum fairness, actually really isn't that important, as long as your players enjoy the time they have at the table. So really, all of my advice is in service of that idea. So how do you make sure your players have a good time? One thing that you have to understand is what they're looking for from the game. Tone and subject matter will have a big effect on the mood at the table, so you should try to have some idea what your players are going to be into. Some people might prefer something serious and gritty and dramatic, while other people might be more into lighthearted, silly, fluffy escapism. Some people might want cinematic, high-flying action, while other people want a game with heavier themes or a more literary approach to narrative. There's a lot of different things that people are looking for when they come to these games, and you just kind of have to figure out what your group's looking for and be there for them on that. Talk to your players about this stuff if you're not sure, and give it some serious thought while you're building out the ideas and themes and style of your campaign. The next thing is that as the game runner, you're in control of the flow of the game. This is another thing that's going to vary in preference from player to player to some degree. But basically, nobody's hoping that they're going to say, I want to do a thing, and then you, the DM, will say, well, hold on, I need to look up a table and see what happens, and then spend 3 minutes flipping through the book, right? So, to avoid this, you need to know the rules well. Read the book, make yourself some reference notes, photocopy charts to tape onto the inside of your DM screen, check online for common rules problems, do your research. But it may seem like this advice is about trying to get the whole game to fit into your head at once so you can just instantly regurgitate the right rule whenever you need it. But that's not really what you're looking for here. You're not trying to memorize all the rules. You're trying to gain an understanding of the logic the rules are founded on. Because what you're really looking to be able to do is, when you hit that moment where a player wants to do something and you don't immediately know rules for it, either because they're not there or because they are there and you just forgot that part, you want to be able to drop something on the spot that is consistent with the ideas and systems that the game is built on. It's very often better for the flow of the game for you to just produce a ruling on the spot, rather than to stop and do a bunch of research. But your players also need the game world to behave in a somewhat consistent way, so that they can come up with ideas that make sense within it. Consistent, laws of physics, for lack of a better term, will help your players be able to come up with clever and inventive solutions to problems, which is something that they will almost always enjoy doing. And that idea brings me to the last thing I want to talk about. There can be a temptation, as a game runner, to write a really great story for your friends to play through because you want to make something great and share it with them, right? You're putting in all this effort, and make no mistake, it's going to be some effort. And you want to create something great to bring to the table so that the players will really enjoy. But, and I cannot stress enough how important I think this is, the most important creative act in your RPG is the collaborative one that happens at the table. The thing that's magical about these games is that together, you and the players will create a story and an experience that no one of you could have created on your own. You, as the game runner, are responsible for creating sort of a general overarching plot for the adventure, but no matter how carefully you script events or how much you lay down narrative breadcrumbs for them to follow, your players will eventually try to resolve a situation in a way that you didn't think of, or come up with some crazy way of avoiding the situation entirely, or maybe just leave the narrative line that you planned altogether. And when something like that happens, the best thing for you to do is just roll with it, right? Everybody's had that frustration of thinking that they've seen some cool side path in a video game and then running into the invisible wall at the end of the at the edge of the area, right? Your role-playing game can't be like that. So in a lot of ways, this mirrors the thing I said a minute ago about improvising rule solutions. You need to be familiar enough with the ideas that your adventure is founded on that you can improvise new narrative. You can improvise a new direction from the player's actions that will feel consistent and will get you to some kind of resolution, even if it's not the one that you originally were planning. So this is a little abstract. So let me lay out a couple of examples of the kind of thing I'm talking about. I once played in a game of D&D, where as part of a far-ranging quest, go to these places and get these magic items kind of thing, we entered a swamp, a magical, enchanted swamp, and we encountered a creature made of mud. And his name was Mud, and when he spoke, he kind of sounded like mud. And I don't know what it was about that moment, but we were totally delighted by him. He was fantastic. And we invited him to join our adventuring company, and we scooped him up in one of our backpacks, and we took him with us. And as a magically animated being, he turned out to be remarkably knowledgeable about the magic of the swamp and, all kinds of things that were relevant to the adventure. And in the end, he played an integral part in dealing with some of the adventure's major adversaries. And then, when we were talking about the adventure after it was over, the DM told us that Mud originally was not a big part of the adventure. He was just a weird creature that we were going to encounter in the swamp. And his whole purpose in the thing was to communicate to us the idea of how weird and magicked up the swamp was, right? Like, look, some of the mud came to life. Isn't that crazy? But as soon as he became important to us, he became important to the adventure. And a bunch of stuff got reshuffled behind the scenes. The arc of the adventure from that point completely changed. And it all rolled off so smoothly that none of us suspected during the game that Mud was never meant to be a meaningful character. So, I guess, in addition to the point I'm trying to illustrate with this example, you could take another valuable lesson here. The players are really extremely in the dark. When you make changes behind the walls, they're not going to have any idea most of the time. But also, when you make mistakes behind the walls, they're not going to have any idea most of the time. So that might take a little bit of pressure off if you're going out DMing for your first time. If you screw up, probably nobody will even notice. Back to the point, for another example, take a Shadowrun game I ran a couple of years ago. A mid-level business executive, a real, generic salaryman type character, had, while drunk, spent a very large amount of money on an extravagant gift for his mistress, and was terrified that his wife was going to discover how much money was missing, and from there, figure out what it had been spent on. So he hired our brand new team of amateur criminals in a panic to go and steal the gift back so that he could give it to his wife while pretending that he had bought it for her in the first place. My plan was for this to be the first in a series of simple, kind of goofy adventures to introduce them to the setting and systems, where they would clean up after this scummy idiot while letting him get his comeuppance a couple of times. But between the facts of the case and the way I roleplayed him, they ended up hating this guy so much that I decided to drop the long-term plan, change the ending of the run entirely, to, wrap up his story and get him out of here. But then, before they could even see the way that I was going to wrap up the story, one of the players just had enough and shot him at the meet where they were supposed to get paid after stealing the thing. And that led to a completely different kind of fun, because it led to a story about them trying to evade the consequences of that rash action. In both of these cases, The adventures and desires of the players transformed the story in important ways that led to something totally different than the game writer had originally planned. And in the Shadowrun case, in fact, it resulted in a whole set of adventures that I would not have thought to build out for them. So that's my general, broad DMing advice. If you have any DMing questions or advice of your own even, feel free to leave it in the comments below or over on the subreddit. And thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.